Mr. Garrison is many things: a teacher, a politician, and apparently a serial offender. Join us as we uncover his prison-worthy moments that somehow slip through the cracks of South Park justice. In the episode Proper Condom Use, Mr. Garrison traumatizes some kindergarten kids in the name of education. You know, the usual. The episode begins with Stan and Kyle playing with their Jennifer Lopez playset. I'm not even gonna ask. Carmen arrives to show them something that he learned from the 5th graders, but it turns out he's just milking Kenny's dog and saying it's a game called Red Rocket. Now that is a criminal-worthy offense. At least people in prison wouldn't have to see it. Stan thinks that what Carmen did was super cool and decides to show his parents and their friends by doing it on his own dog. But his parents are obviously horrified. Stan is sent to his room, followed by his horny dog, and is grounded for 10 months. What makes that worse is that his dog is gonna expect that for the next 10 months. But Stan has no understanding of why he's being punished. His parents try to explain what sex is, but they have no understanding of how to explain it. They, along with the other parents, decide that the schools should be teaching sex education at a younger age. Mr. Mackey and Miss Chokesondick teach the 4th graders sex ed, with Mr. Mackey trying to explain to the boys how to have sex, but he can't remember what to do. And Miss Chokesondick tells the girls that they'll get an STD and die if the boys don't wear a condom. Dramatic, but probably true. Guys are pretty gross. While all this chaos is going on, Mr. Garrison is tasked with teaching proper condom use to kindergarten children. They can't spell yet, but this is mandatory education. But his preferred method of applying one, it makes the kids cry. And so does his endless list of the different and possible sexual positions. Again, who needs to spell cat when you know the Kama Sutra? Having learned absolutely nothing, the boys ask the girls what they learned. But the girls are horrified and keep their distance, insisting that the boys need to wear condoms at all times. When the boys go to the pharmacy, they refuse any condoms by the male pharmacist, and given them by the female pharmacist, who wants them to be safe if they're having sexual encounters. The boys try to wear them at all times, but they're too uncomfortable. Mr. Mackey tells them that they only have to wear them during sex. The boys are furious that they've been misled, going to the girls' fort and ordering them to leave town, but BB refuses, throwing a sharpened boomerang and killing Kenny by accident. Now the boys and girls are at war. The battle leads to major casualties until the girls' compound is totally destroyed by the boys in a huge explosion. Sharon is quick to blame Stan for the mess, but Miss Chokesondick admits that she forgot to tell the girls that in order to get an STD, you have to have sex. Kinda basic information there, Miss Chokesondick. Chef, however, takes the belief that sex ed needs to be taught by family rather than at schools through textbooks and diagrams, since they could end up being taught by someone who does not know, Mr. Mackey, someone with a bad opinion of it, Miss Chokesondick, or a pervert, Mr. Garrison. He says they don't have to worry about this for many years, relieving the kids who can just spend the next decade having fun, which Cartman does as he plays Red Rocket with another dog. Oh, my eyes are burning. Weight Gain 4000 sees South Park getting a visit from TV celebrity Kathie Lee Gifford and prepping a big welcome. But Mr. Garrison decides it's better to just kill her. The episode begins with Cartman winning the Save Our Fragile Planet essay contest, when it's announced that TV star Kathie Lee Gifford will visit South Park to present the award. But of course, Wendy is furious, convinced Cartman cheated, and vows to expose the truth, because be real, who the hell believes Cartman can win at anything remotely intellectual? The entire town is excited about Kathie Lee's visit, especially Mayor McDaniels, who sees it as an opportunity to advance her political career. Organizing a large-scale event to honor her arrival, Chef is asked to sing at the event and views it as a chance to seduce Kathie Lee through music. Meanwhile, Mr. Garrison is tasked with directing the children's school play, which is supposed to honor Kathie Lee. But Garrison harbors a deep grudge against her, dating back to when they were children. Kathie Lee upstaged him in a national talent show with her performance of If My Friends Could See Me Now. This resentment grows as Mr. Hat, Mr. Garrison's puppet, urges him to assassinate Kathie Lee, which is, you know, a major escalation for a petty feud. But hey, childhood trauma runs deep. Garrison tries his best to focus on the play, which is a historically accurate but extremely violent depiction of battles between the pioneers and Native Americans. A rehearsal leaves the town horrified by the graphic content. When Mayor McDaniels tells Garrison that Kathie Lee won't like it, he shouts, "To hell with Kathie Lee Gifford," and is immediately fired as director, long overdue, honestly. Garrison then agrees to let Mr. Hat carry out the murder plot. He visits Jimbo's gun shop to buy a rifle to assassinate Kathy Lee and put an end to her daytime TV terror. Cartman, eager to impress Kathy Lee, sees a commercial for Weight Gain 4000, a bodybuilding supplement. Completely misunderstanding how it works, Cartman buys and consumes it without exercising, resulting in him becoming severely obese. More than usual anyway. As the big day approaches, Wendy investigates Cartman's essay and discovers that he simply plagiarized a work by Henry David Thoreau, confirming that his win was totally unearned, and honestly, Thoreau of all people? Come on, bro. On the day of the event, Kathy Lee arrives in a bulletproof glass bubble. Chef performs his graphic song, all about his desire to make sweet love to her, while Mr. Garrison takes his position in a book depository to carry out his assassination plan. At no point does Mr. Garrison even consider the idea that assassinating someone may not be the right answer to his personal troubles. Realizing what's going on, Wendy and Stan rush to stop him. But just as Wendy's about to talk Mr. Garrison down, Stan accidentally reignites his anger by mentioning how Kathy Lee outshined him in the talent show. So naturally, that urge to kill comes screaming back. Mr. Hat takes the shot, but the stage collapses under Cartman's massive weight, throwing Kathy Lee to safety. Instead, it's Kenny who gets hit by the bullet and impaled on a flagpole. Nobody has luck as bad as that kid. As Kathy Lee's security team rushes her out of South Park, Wendy tries to expose Cartman's cheating, but the townspeople, still disappointed over Kathy Lee's quick exit, don't care about some brat kid, which is really the way everybody should be dealing with Cartman on a general daily basis. Mr. Garrison is held in a mental hospital, Mr. Hat in a straitjacket, while Cartman appears on Geraldo, proudly boasting about his weight gain and calling himself a beefcake. Meanwhile, Chef finally succeeds in seducing Kathy Lee, but finds that she is demanding. So basically, everyone ends up right where they belong. In Mr. Garrison's fancy new vagina, Mr. Garrison's sex change surgery becomes one of the most selfish things he's ever done. The episode begins with Mr. Garrison undergoing a sex change at the Trinidad Medical Center to become Mrs. Garrison, fully embracing the belief that she has always been a woman trapped in a man's body. She happily purchases tampons, confusing the boys in town, though they quickly accept her decision. Once again, the kids in town are the only sensible ones. Meanwhile, Kyle tries out for the Colorado State basketball team, but is rejected because, according to the coach, Jews can't play basketball. The rest of the team consists of tall African-American players, and not a single short Jewish guy like him. Kyle is devastated. Stan and Kenny offer comfort, but of course, Cartman mocks them mercilessly. At home, Kyle asks his parents about sex changes. His father, Gerald, reacted with disgust when he hears about Mr. Garrison's surgery. Sheila, however, explains that people sometimes change their bodies to reflect who they truly are on the inside. It's a nice way to approach the problem, but also a frickin' disaster. Inspired by this conversation, Kyle reveals that he feels like a tall African American trapped inside a small Jewish body because of his love for basketball and rap music. He decides that surgery is the solution, and he plans to undergo negroplasty to become a tall African American man. Gerald and Sheila strongly oppose Kyle's decision, but Kyle persists regardless. Gerald is so angered by the situation that he goes to confront Dr. Biber, the surgeon responsible for Mrs. Garrison's sex change. While there, Biber notices Gerald's dolphin t-shirt and convinces him to have a dolphinplasty surgery, transforming Gerald into a half-man, half-dolphin creature. Now convinced surgery is acceptable, Gerald allows Kyle to proceed with his negroplasty. Meanwhile, Mrs. Garrison and Mr. Slave fall out. Since Mrs. Garrison had the surgery without considering Slave's feelings, namely the fact that he detests vaginas, Garrison coldly tells him to stop being gay, leading to a pretty brutal breakup. Mr. Slave storms off, ending their relationship. It's one of the most inconsiderate and rude things Mrs. Garrison has ever done throughout the whole show. But Mrs. Garrison soon begins to worry. She hasn't had her period in several days. She suspects she might be pregnant from her sexual escapades with multiple truckers. She rushes to Planned Parenthood for an abortion, only to discover that her sex change did not give her the ability to menstruate or conceive a child. She's basically just her old self, with boobs. Feeling deceived, Mrs. Garrison returns to Dr. Biber and demands her male body back. But Biber reveals that her old scrotum has been used as a dorsal fin for Gerald, and her testicles are now Kyle's kneecaps. Without these specific parts, the surgery cannot be reversed. She needs her balls back. Mrs. Garrison and Biber track down Kyle, who has joined the basketball team thanks to his new body. However, Biber warns that Kyle's kneecaps will explode if he performs any athletic feats, such as jumping. Rushing to the basketball game with Stan, they arrive just as Kyle is about to score. Kyle jumps and nets the ball. His kneecaps explode. Garrison's balls are all over the place, just not on her. Kyle and Gerald are informed that they can reverse their surgeries, but Mrs. Garrison cannot. Despite this, Mrs. Garrison embraces her new identity, declaring that she would rather be a fake woman who can't menstruate than a gay guy. And I'm not sure what the lesson in this episode would be. Next on our list, Mr. Garrison does his best to get fired by giving his students some trauma they will never forget. It's the death camp of tolerance. The episode begins with Mr. Garrison getting promoted to 4th grade teacher by Principal Victoria, after previously being demoted for admitting to being gay. He starts to realize that if he gets fired for being gay, he could sue the school for millions. It's a foolproof plan. Along with his S&M partner, Mr. Slave, he begins performing outrageous and disturbing acts in class to get fired, terrifying the students. Okay, it's a deeply problematic plan. The kids complain to their parents, who totally misinterpret their complaints about Garrison's actions as intolerance towards his homosexuality, and punish them by sending them to the Museum of Tolerance, because the only way to teach tolerance is to make it mandatory. Meanwhile, in school, Garrison escalates his behavior, conducting a disturbing science experiment involving a gerbil named Lemmywinks being, inserted into Mr. Slave. I mean, what the actual hell? The boys tell Chef about the horrifying event, and Chef reports it to Principal Victoria. However, instead of addressing the issue, she sends Chef to a tolerance seminar, again believing it's a homophobic reaction. The boys are also sent to tolerance camp, which operates like a concentration camp, where they undergo harsh physical labor and forced finger painting to teach them the act of tolerance. Despite his extreme behavior, Garrison is set to receive the Courageous Teacher Award for his resilience in overcoming adversity. Frustrated that his plan to get fired isn't working, Garrison goes all out at the award ceremony, presenting an overly flamboyant and highly stereotypical gay performance with Mr. Slave. Thankfully, this time without a gerbil. Speaking of, inside Mr. Slave's body, the gerbil embarks on a surreal journey through his digestive system, guided by animal spirits in the form of a frog king, a sparrow prince, and a catatapfish. It's like The Hobbit, but good and more gross. At the ceremony, the parents begin to realize that their children's complaints were about Garrison's disturbing actions, not about his sexuality. When Garrison tries to push the limits further, the audience applauds, too afraid to be labeled intolerant. In frustration, Garrison breaks down, admitting his goal was to get fired for being gay, and explains that tolerating something isn't the same as accepting it. He argues that the Museum of Tolerance should be renamed the Museum of Acceptance, highlighting the difference between merely putting up with something and genuinely accepting it. The parents realize they misunderstood their kids and send them to tolerance camp unnecessarily, and head to the camp to bring their emaciated children home. Meanwhile, Garrison's plan backfires as Principal Victoria enrolls him and Mr. Slave in the camp for being intolerant of their own behavior. However, Mr. Slave kinda thinks the camp's suffering might actually be fun, just as Lemmywinks escapes and is crowned the Gerbil King. The less said about that whole subplot, the better. Follow That Egg gives Mrs. Garrison her best shot yet at jail time, using her authority to destroy any hopes of her ex being happy. The episode begins with Mrs. Garrison assigning her students a project to teach them about parenting responsibility. Each student is paired with a partner to care for an egg like a baby. Dan is anxious about being paired with his ex-girlfriend Wendy, but to his horror, Wendy is paired with his best friend Kyle, while Stan is assigned to BB. This stirs some tension and jealousy in Stan, who still has unresolved feelings for Wendy. And nothing makes things more difficult than an egg baby. Stan grows suspicious that Kyle might have feelings for Wendy, despite Kyle showing absolutely no interest in the project or Wendy at all. Meanwhile, BB complains to Wendy about Stan's total indifference towards their egg, desperate to have her fake baby daddy actually care about something. The tension escalates when Stan sarcastically calls Kyle to ask if he's alright, to which Kyle responds by saying the project is dumb. Stan snaps back, telling Kyle his hat is stupid, deeply offending him and further straining their friendship. All this over an egg. At the same time, Mrs. Garrison discovers that her ex, Mr. Slave, is planning to marry Big Gay Al once same-sex marriage is legalized in Colorado. Enraged with jealousy, Mrs. Garrison schemes to stop the marriage by campaigning against the legalization of gay unions. Insane pettiness for something so minor. She claims that gay couples are unfit to raise children and presents this argument to the governor, who demands proof that same-sex families are unstable before he will veto the marriage bill. Well, now she has to do something despite her exes. To support her claim, Mrs. Garrison reorganizes the student pairs into same-sex couples, hoping their poor parenting skills will destroy their eggs and demonstrate her point that gay couples cannot be trusted with kids. Stan and Kyle, still on bad terms, are paired together together, while Wendy becomes upset over losing the egg she shared with Kyle. But Stan continues to suspect Kyle of having feelings for Wendy, while Kyle remains totally confused by Stan's hostility. Meanwhile, Cartman breaks his egg but tries to manipulate Mrs. Garrison into giving him and his partner a passing grade anyway. Mrs. Garrison, determined to stop the gay marriage law, threatens him and gives him a new egg, just to spite the little brat. She plans the final egg check in front of the governor's office, hiring an assassin to sabotage the students' success by destroying their eggs. You know, just to really make sure. When the assassin destroys Stan and Kyle's egg, it is revealed that Kyle had anticipated Stan's neglect and replaced the egg with a fake one, secretly saving the real egg. Kyle assures Stan that he has no interest in Wendy, and the two boys reconcile. They rush to the governor's office, narrowly dodging gunfire and explosives. Stan presents the intact egg to Mrs. Garrison just before passing out from exhaustion, sabotaging the plan. Despite Mrs. Garrison's efforts, the bill passes, and same-sex marriage is legalized in South Park. Mr. Slave and Big Gay Al are married in a big gay wedding, and Randy congratulates Stan and Kyle for helping secure gay marriage rights. Although the boys are confused about what they actually did to achieve that, Wendy apologizes to Stan for doubting his parenting skills, but Stan, no longer caring about her opinion, dismisses her, leaving Wendy upset as she walks away. I know this is all about Mrs. Garrison, but like, jerk move, Stan. In D-Yikes, Mrs. Garrison pretty much gives up any hope of teaching the kids, focusing instead on building her lesbian social life. The episode begins with Mrs. Garrison, frustrated after a bad blind date, assigning her class to read The Old Man and the Sea and write an essay on it over the weekend. The boys are upset about the homework, but Cartman has a plan. He brings the boys to a truck rental site, hiring a group of Mexicans to write their essays for them. However, the Mexicans totally misunderstand the task and write letters to their essays, which is Spanish for friends instead of essays, leaving the boys in trouble. Of course, if they studied to learn a second language, maybe they would know that. Meanwhile, Mrs. Garrison visits the all-female gym Curves to vent her frustrations and meets a woman named Allison who invites her to Le Boss, an all-female bar. Garrison is initially shocked to realize it's a lesbian bar, but becomes curious about her sexuality after spending an intimate night with Allison. By Monday, the boys realize they don't have their essays, but Mrs. Garrison gives them more time, as she's preoccupied with her newfound identity, announcing to the class that she is gay once again, which is not exactly an appropriate thing to do in a classroom of all things. Mrs. Garrison returns to Les Beaux more confidently, but the bar's patrons receive bad news. Les Beaux is being closed to make way for a Persian-owned club. Garrison rallies the lesbians, refusing to let the Persians take their bar. They appeal to Mayor McDaniels, who dismisses them. When a Persian representative, Amir Hadi, arrives to reason with the lesbians, Mrs. Garrison kicks him in the groin, shouting, "This is Le Beaux," because a 300 reference wasn't overdone when this episode aired. The defiance of the lesbians gains media attention, and support for their cause spreads. Amir calls for reinforcements, leading to a minor confrontation with the Persians, which ends in a standoff. Xerxes, the Persian leader, arrives to confront Mrs. Garrison, but Garrison reveals a secret. Xerxes is actually a woman. In Persian culture, women cannot be in positions of power, leaving Xerxes horrified. Mrs. Garrison explains that the lesbian community accepts people for who they are, leading Xerxes to feel liberated. She decides to let Les Beaux stay, and the lesbians celebrate their victory. Mrs. Garrison confesses that she's no longer teaching, as the school has temporarily hired the Mexicans, who are now teaching math. Kyle remarks that, for the first time, he's actually learning something useful, which is about as damning as a comment about the South Park education system as a 10-year-old can make. Mrs. Garrison finds herself running all over town in Eek a Penis when she lashes out at kids and leaves her job to regain her manhood. The episode begins with Mrs. Garrison realizing that, despite her transition, she still feels like a man inside. Frustrated, she lashes out against the children in her classroom, a majorly inappropriate thing to do, and is removed from teaching by Principal Victoria and Mr. Mackey, who suggests she take time off to sort out her personal issues. With their teacher gone, Principal Victoria asks the class if any of the kids can temporarily teach their class. Very professional behavior. Cartman eagerly volunteers and takes over, relishing his newfound authority. Basically, he just wants to be a dictator. At home, Mrs. Garrison watches a news report about the Vacanti mouse, a mouse with a human ear grown on its back. Inspired, she visits a laboratory and asks the scientists to grow her a penis using her DNA. They agree, provided she pays them all her money. Seems like a fair trade. Meanwhile, Cartman is approached by two idiotic men from the Denver County School Board who are impressed with his work and want him to teach inner-city kids. Enticed by the $300 pay, Cartman agrees and prepares for his new role by disguising himself as Eric Cartminez, a pretty offensive Hispanic manic alter ego. At Jim Davis High School, Carmenez attempts to teach calculus to the confused students. At the same time, Mrs. Garrison's penis, now attached to a mouse, escapes from the lab. As chaos ensues in the town, with people spotting the rogue penis, Mrs. Garrison frantically searches for it. It's an old-school crosstown penis hunt. Back in the classroom, Cartman teaches the inner-city students how to cheat to get ahead, citing Bill Belichick as an example. He explains that cheating is how white people succeed in life, and the students eagerly adopt his methods. One student, Juanita, confides in Cartman that she won't attend college because of her pregnancy. Cartman convinces her that getting an abortion is the ultimate form of cheating. Eventually, Mrs. Garrison tracks her penis to a storm drain, but loses it. Despairing over her lost money and her failed quest, she will never again have a peen. Cartman students, now adept at cheating, perform exceptionally well on their exams, earning praise and presenting Cartman with a plaque for teaching them the white people method. Principal Victoria announces that Mr. Garrison will return to the classroom, having become a man again. Mr. Garrison asserts that true gender difference lies in the ability to get pregnant, making a crude remark to a co-worker before celebrating his return to teaching. He's not even slightly more professional, so you know everything is just fine. If you thought Mr. Garrison's other appearances were bad, this one is a whole other level. The real Mr. Garrison is unveiled and Cartman joins NAMBLA. The episode begins with Cartman deciding he's too mature for his friends. He wants to hang out with older guys, so he goes online and stumbles onto a chat room for men who like young boys, totally unaware that they're internet predators. The next day, Cartman meets the most stereotypical predator imaginable, who is later arrested for inappropriate conduct with a minor. But Cartman has no idea and just goes back to the chat room to find a new friend who will definitely end up getting arrested. Meanwhile, Kenny's parents are attempting to get pregnant again, but Kenny isn't happy about that. He knows that when the baby is born, they'll pay more attention to his sibling than to him, so he acts out, hoping to deprive his dad of his fertility. The next day, Cartman meets another predator, but it turns out that the guy in question is Mr. Garrison, who also gets arrested for improper conduct with minors. Okay, so I'm pretty confident in saying this is a very strong reason for him to be in jail, right? But by this point, Cartman is convinced that Stan and Kyle are sabotaging his attempts at making new friends. At the South Park police station, Mr. Garrison and the other offenders get thrown in jail, but a group called the North American Man-Boy Love Association, or NAMBLA, attempts to break them out, claiming there's nothing wrong with loving young boys. The South Park police force them to leave. Cartman visits Dr. Mephisto, asking if he can genetically engineer adult friends for him, but Mephisto instead encourages him to join NAMBLA, an organization where even he is a member. Is there one grown man in South Park who isn't a member of a sketchy organization? The next day, NAMBLA holds a meeting at the South Park Inn, seeking ways to get more young boys to join their disgusting cult. When Cartman shows up, the members embrace him, making him the poster child of NAMBLA, which of course he loves. After discovering that his mother is pregnant, Kenny tries to find ways to terminate the baby, but he only succeeds in injuring his dad over and over again. Cartman poses for inappropriate pictures for NAMBLA, only to discover a banquet will be thrown in his honor, which, again, he loves. Food and attention, he's all in. He's encouraged to invite all the boys in town, but refuses to invite Stan or Kyle. He does, however, brag about the banquet. Stan starts to think that maybe they should act more mature, deciding to join NAMBLA themselves. The police raid Mephisto's NAMBLA, only to discover that there are two NAMBLAs in South Park, and this one is the North American Marlo Brando lookalikes. Garrison is here too, and is angry that he's in the wrong place. So just for those who are thinking that Garrison was framed, nope, he is a bad guy. As it turns out, the two NAMBLAs have fought one another for decades. The Brandos and the police unite to stop the other NAMBLA. All of the boys arrive at NAMBLA and are taken to the hotel rooms of the predators, but they now understand what's going on and quickly stage an escape just as the police arrive, as do Kenny and his parents. It's chaotic as hell. The boys hide, with Cartman manipulating Butters into agreeing to be their sacrificial lamb, allowing the predators to take him so everyone else can go. But Butters just about manages to avoid a terrible fate. Kenny's dad, however, wanders into a room full of NAMBLA members and isn't so lucky. Kenny's dad is hospitalized for his injuries at the hands of his attackers. With the NAMBLA people arrested, Stan and Kyle refuse to let the predators get away without punishment, reminding them that they are criminals. Cartman finally realizes he doesn't need adult friends, he just has to wait for his friends to grow up. Not him though, obviously. He's mature enough, as if we haven't suffered enough. Worldwide Recorder Concert gives us the best look yet at the trauma in Mr. Garrison's mind, and it's worse than you can imagine. The episode episode begins with Mr. Garrison's class preparing for the world's largest recorder concert. But the students sound terrible. What do you expect from a recorder? Mr. Mackey announces the location has changed from Oklahoma to Arkansas due to a flood. And upon hearing this, Garrison reacts emotionally and refuses to go. His parents live there. Mackey asks if he was sexually abused as a child, prompting Garrison to run out, crying, leaving everyone puzzled. But not that puzzled, surely. It's pretty obvious. On the bus ride to Arkansas, Cartman tries to find the brown note, a sound that supposedly causes anyone who hears it to instantly poop their pants. Cartman claims it was tested during World War II, but Kyle doubts that's accurate. He uses Kenny as his test subject, but can't seem to find it. And believe me, he wants to make Kenny poop. Meanwhile, Garrison becomes anxious as the bus approaches Arkansas. Mr. Hat, his puppet, insults Mackey, who realizes Garrison is using Mr. Hat to avoid confronting his issues. This leads to a physical altercation between Mackey and Mr. Hat, with the puppet emerging the winner. As they arrive, a group of New York third graders insult the boys, calling them rednecks and queefs. The boys don't know what queef means, further fueling the New Yorkers' mockery. Determined to get revenge, the boys vow to humiliate them. At the hotel, Stan and Kyle try to figure out the meaning of queef, while Cartman continues researching the brown note. Garrison visits his parents, only to find out that his father never actually abused him, which confuses his parents and frustrates Garrison even further. Mr. Mackey later speaks with Mr. Garrison Sr., who reveals that his son is upset because he was actually never abused. Mackey's stunned, but advises the father to figure out how far he'll go for his son. Yes, you heard me. Garrison will not be happy until he believes he has been abused by his father. Seriously, lock this guy up already. Meanwhile, Cartman successfully discovers the brown note and tests it on Kenny, confirming its effect. The boys decide to sneak the brown note into the New Yorkers' concert sheet music. However, the revised sheet gets distributed to everyone in the concert, not just the New York kids. It's really more of a brown choir. During the night, someone sneaks into Mr. Garrison's room and assaults him, leading Garrison to believe it's his father, giving him the twisted comfort that he craved. The next day, Garrison happily prepares for the concert, unaware that Kenny G, a saxophonist, was hired by his father for the task. But Garrison believes it was his father, so he's happy for some reason. At the concert, the entire world plays the brown note, causing mass defecation. The New York kids are impressed with the boys' prank, and despite the chaos, they part on good terms. As the boys still wonder about queef, Mr. Mackey explains the meaning. Big day for him, helping Garrison get abused and teaching kids bad words. Mr. Garrison leads into xenophobia and blatant sexual assault against a world leader in Where My Country Gone. It's hard to come back from this one. The episode begins with Kyle being honored by President Barack Obama for his acceptance of Caitlyn Jenner. Meanwhile, Mr. Garrison notices an influx of Canadians illegally entering the US. When these students cause chaos in his class, Garrison refers to them as Canucks, getting him in trouble with PC principal. As a result, Garrison is forced to take a second language class to better understand and communicate with his Canadian students. During class, Garrison daydreams a song about America's issues and begins to rally people behind his frustrations with the Canadian immigrant situation. Sound familiar to anybody? His frustration escalates when he interrupts a Canadian history play at the school to voice his opinions, leading to his firing by PC principal. This further fuels tensions between the American and Canadian students at South Park Elementary. To resolve the conflict, Cartman, Stan, Butters, Kenny, Tolkien, and Craig hatch a bizarre plan, reenacting the plot of The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Their scheme involves an American student, Hot being a Canadian student, and Butters unfortunately gets chosen for the task, because Butters is always the victim in situations like this. Meanwhile, Garrison's campaign against the Canadians gains traction, as he rallies the town to support building a wall on the US-Canada border. However, when he arrives at the border, he finds that the Canadians have already built a wall to keep Americans out. Determined to discover what they're hiding, Garrison sneaks into Canada by going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. At the same time, Butters begins dating a Canadian girl named Charlotte, and the two quickly fall in love. During dinner with her family, Butters learns that Canadians fled their country due to their disastrous election. They elected a candidate who spouted outrageous statements and offered no real solutions. By the time they realized the gravity of the situation, he had already won, leading to chaos in Canada. Upon arriving in Canada, Garrison discovers that the country has fallen into a post-apocalyptic state due to its new president. He confronts the Canadian president, and their heated argument turns violent when Garrison kills him by sexually assaulting him to death. He does what? Garrison is a genuine criminal! With the president dead, the Canadians decide to return to their country, sadly separating Butters from Charlotte. After this unexpected success, Garrison announces his bid for the 26th 2016 US presidential election, with Caitlyn Jenner as his running mate. The episode ends with the two riding off to Washington, with Jenner accidentally running over another pedestrian, and the whole world continued to hope for the death of Mr. Garrison.